Howdy, howdy, partners! How you doing? I don't know. I'm sick of opening it with, hey guys, welcome to the video. I'm sick of opening it like that. Today I want to talk about the curious state of Australian boxing. Now, this is an experimental video. I don't usually talk about Australian boxing, but I wanted to talk about it because I've been paying attention to the scene as of late. Now, full disclaimer, because I'm going to be saying a lot of things in this video that some might not agree with. I am not knocking athleticism. I am not knocking anybody who jumps in that ring, laces up the gloves, and gets hit for like half hour. I'm not knocking anyone who does that for a living. I think my perspectives are fully as a viewer watching these elite athletes jump into the ring and box. I'm saying this as a fan, as someone who views casually as a viewer. I want to talk about the big names in Australian boxing at the moment. Right now, the biggest name in our boxing industry, I would say, and this is purely from me as a casual viewer, is Tszyu. Tszyu is someone who came from the famous lineage, his father is Kostya, one of our most famous athletes, world champion even. And for the first few years of his career, he struggled to get outside of that aura of, oh, how is he comparing to his father? That's what it was for so many years. Oh, Tszyu. But, when Kostya was at that point, you can't compare the two. They are different generations. They are different boxers. They are different athletes. The competition is way different than it was in the 90s and 80s when Kostya was really in there winning ranks and, winning titles. But Tszyu is probably the most notable boxer in the country at this point. When Tszyu fights, the country kind of stops and pays attention to what he's saying. Not everyone, but people who care about Australian boxing, we do pay attention. And then his brother Nikita is also coming up the ranks. His brother Nikita is also coming up those ranks, which I think Nikita has an even harder task now because you have the famous lineage, the same problem that Tszyu had, which was coming from that famous lineage of Kostya. But then you have your brother there, Tszyu, who is a world-class athlete as well now. So it's like, it's a double struggle to break free of that, And I understand Nikita's kind of stance of he's fully focused at the moment. He's like, I've got to focus in on this stuff. I got to do what I got to do. Like, I get him. I understand. Do you want to, as someone who's career changing at the moment and kind of looking to do new things, I'm someone who is like, yeah, you know what? I got to lock in. I got to know this stuff. I've got to, as in an era where AI is coming very prominent, I've got to know what to do. I've got to understand in here mentality. I've got to be able to think. So I understand the mentality of Nikita's jumping in that ring. He's saying I've got to know the technique. I've got to know what I'm doing. I got to focus. I can't be doing interviews and stuff. I can't be doing all that stuff. I got to be focused, fight week especially. I got to be focused. So I understand that. And also he's trying to break that same thing that Tszyu had to struggle with. But this is not only a video about Tszyu and the zoos, Kostya, this isn't a video just about them. Another promising boxer in Australia is Tszyu. Sorry if I'm pronouncing that incorrectly. I think it's Tszyu, but I've been paying attention to him. He was one of our youngest Olympian boxers ever. I'm not sure what he medaled. Did he win gold? I'm not sure where he medaled in the Olympics, 2012 Olympics. He's also, he's been a absolute gem when he jumps in the ring. When you see him box, he is really pushing where he can take it to. And this is as a casual viewer, you see the names coming up the ranks. You see these Tszyu. You see the Tszyus coming up. Which is why when I say this next part of the video, some of you are going to get rubbed the wrong way. Now, I'm all for athletes from different walks of life jumping in the boxing ring. If they can do it for a charity match or they can do it to draw some money to a cause, then great. Let's utilize that celebrity. Let's utilize that notoriety and let's get some money for like sick kids or hospitals that need help or flood or fire victims. I understand. Let's do something with that celebrity. Let's harness. If two people want to jump in that boxing ring and have a fight, then great, let's do it. Let's do it under certain parameters. But here's where it becomes something that's going to trigger a lot of you. As a casual viewer, I am purely casual. I have never jumped in a boxing ring. Clearly, I'm not the most lean guy to jump in there and fight. I might be a bit like a Butterbean if I jumped in, but even Butterbean was world champion, I think, so I can't knock him. I'm someone who's never professionally boxed, so I'm saying this purely as a casual viewer of Australian boxing. I think there's an over-reliance on rugby league players and Australian rules players. Now, to anyone outside of Australia, that might mean nothing to you. You might say, what are these? I don't know what these are. Is that like soccer? Not like soccer. Soccer in Australia we call the A-League, but in Australia we have two major football codes. Like consider the ball of the NFL in America, that similar oval-shaped ball. We have two of those in Australia. We have Aussie rules, which is primarily all the other states that adopt it. There are a lot of states that also follow both codes. I think Melbourne's one of the states that follow both codes. But then you also have New South Wales and Queensland, which are heavily rugby league, NRL. And we've also expanded down to Melbourne, who follow kind of both codes. The NRL has expanded it's expanding into Papua New Guinea. It's going to expand to WA. You know, the NRL is massive. They got one of the biggest TV rights deals in Australian sport history. I think they closed it a month or two ago for $5.3 billion over 5 years. I'm not sure if that's the exact figure. Someone will have to fact check me on that. But the case in point is that is a mega sport in Australia, especially rugby league. I'm going to focus in on rugby league rather than Aussie rules, although I'm aware that athletes from AFL jump in there as well. I'm thinking of people like Barry Hall and so on. So, rugby league players. Why am I focusing on rugby league players? Because they're elite athletes. Let's just say that up front. I am not knocking any NRL players who jump in the ring and box. Let me say that up front right now. But there is a difference between saying, okay, my career is at its peak, or I'm beginning to have to make those considerations about where I go after my on-field career is at its end, and just jumping in there to say, oh, I can do a bit of boxing, and yeah, let's put it on pay-per-view. There's a big difference. Anthony Mundine is probably one of our greatest sporting prodigies. Now, I know he says some really outrageous stuff. I know not everyone agrees with Anthony Mundine's statements, views on the world. I'm not saying you have to. But in that ring, nobody can deny that Anthony Mundine was one of our greatest sports prodigies. I remember being a kid. Watching rugby league in the 90s was different because it just was. But I remember Chock Mundine, that's what we call him, Chock Mundine, Anthony Mundine. Chock Mundine did this backflip after he scored a try in rugby league. A try is when you put the ball down and you score 4 points. So he scored a try and then he did this backflip. I remember that was so iconic. And he was really at a point in that rugby league phase where he could have went rugby league-wise for another 10 years. Instead, at the height of his rugby league career, he said, I'm going to do boxing. I want to do boxing. And he made it work. Another great example is Solomon Hamono. Now, I have a family connection to Solomon Hamono. I'm someone who, I remember meeting him at my auntie's wedding back in the day, because, yeah, you know, I remember meeting him back in the day. But, yeah, his brother-in-law, first brother, married into my family, and very sad what happened. But Solomon Hamono is someone I remember meeting as a young lad, you know. I remember me meeting Solomon Hamono. I remember remembering him from the rugby league field because he played for a team that I go for, Manly. And I remember meeting him and I was like, I remember you from like, well, I was a kid. I probably didn't say it in these words, but I remember being like, this guy's like famous. I remember this guy. I know who this guy is. I don't know everything about him, but I know who he is. I've seen him on TV. And he jumped and made the boxing work. And he stayed there. He focused on it. He said, this is what I'm doing now. Again, great sporting prodigy example. Hassan Mono is definitely up there in rankings. And all time in Australia, like in terms of people who made the transition and made it work. I think of someone even like, I mean, Blake Ferguson jumped in there, but I'm not really sure what's happening with Blake Ferguson. I know there's a lot of things happening around Blake Ferguson. I can't comment on all that, but I'm aware that Blake Ferguson made the switch at one point, tried to jump to boxing, and I don't necessarily know what he's doing right now, but I know that last time I saw him, he was in a boxing ring. But also I want to talk about Sonny Bill. Sonny Bill is a sporting prodigy, we can't deny. He played for the Kiwis, the All Blacks, you know. He played rugby league for so many years, NRL. He's a sporting prodigy. Then he jumped to boxing. And for a lot of the time, he really gave it all he had. Now, I don't know if he's still officially retired. I don't know if he's retired or if he's still kind of like going in the boxing. But Sonny Bill Williams is someone I was like, if he just had world-class opponents, if they fed him the right people, if they gave him the right opponents. Now you might say, oh, but he wasn't fighting anybody. These are world-class athletes we got. But speaking as a purely casual viewer, this is purely casual. I think the sporting work of Sonny Bill Williams speaks for itself. But there was a perception within Australia that Sonny Bill won't fight ranked athletes because a lot of the boxing matches he had were against, you know, people who were in the boxing ring 10, 15 years ago and were at that level. But that's not a knock to Sonny Bill, because 101 of boxing is you protect your fighter. You protect them. You give a good paycheck to the other fighter as well. You make sure like everyone gets paid. But at the end of the day, the draw was Sonny Bill. And so you say, okay, but we don't want Sonny Bill getting knocked out on pay-per-view. I understand you don't want your prodigy getting knocked out on pay-per-view. I get it. But Sonny Bill could have been a proper, like, he could have been ranked. He could have been possibly a champion, a world champion, if he had focused on it. And I mentioned Sonny Bill because I think Sonny Bill's the threshold. I think Sonny Bill is right on that threshold of, if he gave it everything, and look, he gave it everything in the ring. I'm sure he did. He will tell us. I'm sure he'll tell us he gave it everything he did. I'm not knocking him. But if he had said, no, boxing is my career now, I'm not going back to the field, I'm not doing that. If he had jumped, instead of going to union or, you know, rugby, international rugby for the All Blacks, if he had said, I'm going straight to boxing, boxing is my future, I think we'd think a lot differently about where his boxing career is. I think he would have been probably the biggest boxer in Australia. And I say this to separate athletes from the rugby league field compared to the people who applied themselves to it. Now, Sonny Bill did apply himself. I'm sure everyone who gets off the field and goes into a boxing ring applies themselves. But at a certain point, boxing in Australia started to seem like an NRL retirement village. And this hurt the perception of Australian boxing overall. Now, I want to say this up front. As I said beginning on, at the start of this video, harness the celebrity. I understand, harness the personality. If people will say, oh, I've never heard of any of these other boxers on the card, but I've heard of this one, harness that. And likewise, have the undercard stacked with Australian boxers who are rising, so that people might say, oh, you know what? I came for that Sonny Bill Williams fight, or I came here for Tszyu. I mean, Tszyu's not a footy player, but, you know, I came for these boxers, and I discovered so-and-so by watching that. So, you know, you kind of build the crop while watering it, you know. You get the NRL stars are kind of like the watering can. You make sure like they water everything else. They get buys on pay-per-view. I'm not knocking the model. The model works. It works. The problem is when every second pay-per-view in Australia, every second fight night in Australia is stacked with rugby league players. And it's just, okay, they're back on the field this Friday, but they're having a little boxing match on the Wednesday. Better have a fight. Knock, knock. Who's the asses? Imagine this. I'm going to spell this in a way that international viewers will understand. Imagine the octagon. Imagine UFC. Imagine Dana White saying, okay, our buy rates are not where they used to be. I mean, you know, we need our Conor McGregors back because we're not getting the buy rates we once did. Conor McGregor will sell pay-per-views. You know, our suite of old school fighters might bring back some notoriety. And I love a boxer or a UFC artist, martial artist, who gets back in there and tries to apply their craft. That's great because they are legends of that sport. But imagine if Dana turned around and said, you know what? That Tom Brady retired. I wonder if Tom Brady wants to have a boxing match or a UFC mixed martial arts match in the octagon. Now, I know he did it with CM Punk, and I know CM Punk applied himself for a couple of years with the UFC. I'm not knocking CM Punk. I love CM Punk. But imagine if Dana White had went to NFL and said, let's give me 10 to 20, 50 of the retiring stars, and let's put them in the UFC octagon. How would that have cheapened the overall brand? And I'm not saying that all people who jump in that ring or that octagon or wherever aren't making the commitment to jump in there. I'm not saying that they have not applied themselves. They may have very well done it. They may even win their fights. They might even have a record where they have no losses. That's great. I want to talk about Paul Gallen. Because Paul Gallen is one of the examples that I was never sold on. When Paul Gallen jumped in the boxing ring, I was like, he's towards the end of his rugby league career. Here we go again. Here we go again. But over time, Paul Gallen won my respect in that boxing ring. Because as a casual viewer, I was like, you know what? He's getting absolutely hammered and he keeps coming. He keeps coming at people. Like, I don't remember who he's fighting exactly, but I remember one of the last boxing matches Paul Gallen had. He kept getting hit, and it was like he was getting hit hard. And he kept getting back up. He kept coming. That won my respect with Paul Gallen. But for a lot of time, that was the perception. It was like, oh, rugby league player. Yeah, this is a retirement village. Why not? It ruined the aura of Australian boxing in a lot of ways, where every second pay-per-view was a headline by a rugby league player. And that's not a knock to rugby league players. That is me saying, I would want to see people leave the field and say, you know what, I'm at the height of my rugby league career. Yeah, I could go for another 10 years, but I want to get in that ring. I want to fight the best. I want to be a world champion. That's what I want to see. I want to see the Anthony Mundine model. No? And again, I'm saying this purely as a casual viewer. Casual viewer, never jumped in the ring, probably couldn't tell you the first thing about boxing mentality in that ring while you're fighting. I probably couldn't tell you the first thing. I mean, I could say it as like, oh, well, Muhammad Ali said this or whatever, but I would just be referencing examples of people who've done it. But as a casual viewer, there is a difference between when a pay-per-view is headlined by Tim or Nikita Tszyu, when it's headlined by Jaya Pataya, when it's headlined by an Anthony Mundine, or a Sonny Bill even. I'll say Sonny Bill. There is a difference where we kind of understand, yeah, Sonny Bill could have done football for another 10 years, maybe 5 years. But he jumped in that ring and we could see he had what he needed to do it. But there is a big difference about what is okay and what's perception. Because people perceive reality differently. People perceive what they want to believe. People will say, this is the best boxing match I've ever seen. They're just hitting each other really, really hard. It feels like the 1920s. There are other people who are just like, why am I watching all these ex-NRL stars? It's an aura that, I'm going to compare a wrestling company because I got a wrestling shirt on. It's an aura that AEW's had to try to break free from. Oh, this is just a place for, TNA I had it back in the day, this is just a place for all the old WWE stars to come. And then you watch people like Edge or Adam Copeland in there and Christian Cage now in AEW. And it's like, you know what? They probably wouldn't have had this run in WWE. It's nice to see them go there and reinvent themselves and have a extra additional encore to their careers, I would say. I think that's great. And likewise, I think it's great that rugby league players want to explore the boxing world. If it can bring notoriety, if we can do something and harness that to gain money for a cause or a charity or something, great, let's do it. Let's do it as a fight night. Let's do it as something. But then you start looking at people who are like, I'm going to be ranked and I'm going to have another fight. Yeah, I might jump back in there. And it just becomes, oh, now another one's committing to do another fight? Like, come on. Australian boxing is perceived in a weird spotlight at the moment, just because it does feel a bit like a retirement village sometimes. That's not always. That is not every player who jumps from rugby league or AFL to the boxing ring. That is not every scenario. But when every second fight is, oh, and then did Justin Hodges have a fight in there as well recently? I feel like I watched Justin Hodges or someone, I don't know, I feel like I watched someone, did Justin Hodges have a fight? I don't know. But it's like, when it's stacked with rugby league players, it's just like, oh, I'm just watching NRL trying to be boxing. It needs to grow. If they're going to jump in there, let's say, okay, let's apply yourself in the boxing ring for 12 to 18 months before we get in that ring and have a boxing match. Let's end that rugby league career. Let's say, okay, you're focused on nothing else. You're not focused on, let's get back to the field and score a few tries. You're focused on, let's jump in that boxing ring and let's frickin' go. Let's see that. That's what I want to see as a casual viewer. But again, that word, casual viewer, not athlete, never have been, probably never will be at this point. But there is a perception that Australian boxing is kind of I'm not going to say a joke, but it's perceived in a different light when it goes to world scenes. They look at our ranked fighters and say, yeah, Tszyu, yeah, we can see that. Okay, Jai Opetaia, yeah, we can see that. Nikita, yep, we can see that. Back in the day, you know, we had world champions like Kostya. We had world champions like Mundine. I don't know how high he ranked in the world rankings, but Anthony Mundine was right there. He was there at one point. Denny Green. You know, there are a lot of people who are able to really bring in the world, bring in and sell pay-per-views. And also, they can't have a fight every other month. I get it. But when every second fight is NRL, 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 or AFL, 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 it becomes a bit like, now again, same thing? Didn't we just see this last month? If it brings viewers to younger boxers rising in ranks, great. If it generates money for charities, great. But I want to see, not commitment, I want to see like, I want to see our boxing systems really taken seriously on the world stage. We are taken seriously. We are taken seriously. But I want people to say, I want to go to Australia and box because they have the best boxing scene in the world. That's like why people look at our women's soccer team, the Socceroos, you know? Is it the Socceroos? The Matildas. They look at the Matildas and say, that's one of the best teams in the world at this point. They have some of the best swimmers in the world. They have all these elite athletes in Australia. I want them to do the same. Ash Barty on the tennis court when she was still going. You know, even Goolagong. You know, people look at them and say, yeah, that is world class in Australia, whatever they're doing. But then they look at our boxing industry and they're like, all ex-footy players? What? Are these all football players? Do you have anyone who's actually trained and is headlining this card? Because that's important. Is there anyone who's headlining this card who's not a footy player? Because that's how we're perceived on the world stage. That's how we're being perceived. And that's not a call out. I love footy players are able to go and do that. I love it. I love that they're able to do something after their career ends on the field. I love that after all the horror stories we've heard about on field, and then their career is over and then they have nothing else to do and then they're depressed. I understand this is better than the model that came before. But I want to see our system take a world-class approach. Like, yes, this is great boxing. The fighters in Australia don't have to go to the USA to establish themselves. They can stay right here. The USA can come to us because we have the world-class scene. That's how we need to start being perceived. But I don't know. I'm just a casual viewer. I'll say that. I'm just a casual viewer. This is purely an experimental video. Some people may have a problem with what I've said. If you have a problem with what I've said, jump down in the comments. Keep it within certain parameters though, because I will, if you get outside of certain parameters and start being an idiot, I will block you, because I'm notorious for blocking people. But I will say this. Australian boxing is something that, to so many of us, we do remember growing up on it. As I said, Anthony Mundine, Solomon Mono, I remember these names. And, you know, with these names, they do really start transcending because they applied themselves when they jumped. They stayed within that field. And when I start looking at it, I want to see more of those examples. I want to see more Solomon Monos. I want to see more Anthony Mundine say, you know what, peak of my career, I'm going to do boxing. Rather than, oh, we have a week off next weekend. Oh, it's the off season. Can we have a boxing match? It should be the priority to be a boxer, not the secondary. Oh yeah, we can earn some money doing boxing. Or I don't know if that's the mentality. Sorry if that's not the mentality. Sorry, but rather than, okay, we can have a boxing match in the off season. Why not? Why not? It shouldn't be that. It should be, you know what? I'm actually fighting to be a ranked fighter here, so I'm not going to just jump in there. I need like 12 months to practice and get good at this, and then I will be a boxer. That's what needs to happen. Because perception matters in Australia. Perception matters in the world scene of boxing. How you're perceived really... Look at the Paul brothers, Jake Paul and Logan Paul. YouTubers, other fellow YouTubers, jumped in the boxing ring, fought some of the best fighters of all time. But a lot of people, the public, say, oh, but you're really fighting him at the end of their career, you know, like, you should have fought him 10 years ago, or you really need to fight this fighter who's ranked right now in one of the world rankings, you know. That's the perception. We want to avoid that in Australia as much as possible. We want to avoid that in boxing as much as possible. But what do I know? I'll put a couple end screens here if you want to watch them. I don't know, maybe I talk mostly about physical meter. I will stay in my lane. I will stay in my lane and talk about physical meter at another point, but just wanted to chuck those there. And in the immortal words of the Marrickville mauler Jeff Fennick, I'll end this video with one quote. Peace, and I love yous all.